And it is time for Building Rural Wealth, and we have with us this morning Dan Miller. Dan, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Aaron. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Rachel Dorr with us. Rachel, how was your weekend?
Pretty good, Aaron. Thanks.
What to consider when selling land and equipment? You're going to have to set me up for this, Dan.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, we work with people all over the country, and, of course, this is an agricultural area, and
Sure.
so we're going to talk a little bit about farmers' retirements. Think about what they should think about when it is time to consider selling land and equipment for retirement. A lot of folks, if you don't own your own business or your farm, retirement's about a 401k plan or a pension. But for farmers, the farm itself is the retirement account. I mean, that is where, the land, the tractors, the combine, the livestock, all those things, that is the tools that, a farmer, of course, has to use for planning retirement. And that makes planning a lot more complex and very personal because usually or oftentimes families involved as well. So, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of the key things to think about, as you think about a farmer's retirement.
All right. Well, let's talk about it. Let's start first with the timing of the sale and when's the right time to do that. Talk to me about that a little bit, Dan.
It's really interesting, Aaron. I mean, this is a conversation that we have with a lot of people. And, land and equipment, of course, they don't sell, you can't just go out and just sell them like you can shares of mutual funds or stocks. You
can't just execute a trade.
No, I mean, there is a ready market all the time of some kind, but you want to do it when the market's good for those things as well. And some of the considerations, of course, when it comes to selling land, and again, there's always a market for land, but we know it's not an asset, again, that you can just say, hey, I'm going to sell it today, boom, it's gone.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. So what are some of the considerations? Maybe neighboring farmers are looking to expand. What are the commodity price cycles? Are they driving the land values up or down right now? Those are things to think about. And when it comes to equipment, of course, there's lots of things to think about. Oftentimes there is a pretty good demand for certain pieces of equipment, like right before harvest, like right now, or maybe before planting, things like that. Newer equipment, of course, we know sells quicker and is in demand. And of course, Aaron, if you've seen any of the prices of this new equipment.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is unbelievable.
Staggering.
I mean, it's staggering.
It's staggering.
It is staggering, what, a combine or a big tractor,
beanhead.
Yeah,
what a beanhead costs.
Yeah, that's what is really interesting when you look at a single piece of equipment that isn't even motorized.
Yeah.
Has to be attached to something else, can be $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $100,000. I mean, that's just crazy, when you think about that. So it's all about when it comes to that, timing that sale is often very, very important to consider, and something that farmers have to think about, and have to look at those cycles and take those considerations into account.
All right. One thing that always, it seems like every topic we get into, taxes play a role in almost every single topic. So let's talk about taxes and then proceeds, Rachel. Help me out with that.
That's right. So one thing to keep in mind is the capital gains on land. So land oftentimes, almost always, appreciates quite significantly.
Sure.
So, which is a good thing when you go to sell your land, but
Sure.
a lot of times people are surprised that Uncle Sam is going to take that cut too on the land with the capital gains. So that can trigger a pretty big tax bill when that time comes. And then on top of that, talking about equipment, there is a thing called depreciation recapture. So if you're familiar with, that the depreciation on your taxes over time on that equipment, the IRS is going to want some of that back when you go to sell the equipment. So, you get to write that cost off over the years to reduce your tax bill over the years. And then when you go to offload that, they do want some of that back.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And that's called, what's that called? The depreciation
recapture.
Okay.
So basically they want some of that tax break back when
Sure.
you go to offload that equipment.
Okay.
So that's...
And
a portion.
Rachel, that's if you sell, correct me if I'm wrong, if you sell before it's fully depreciated, correct?
Correct, and it all depends on what you sell it for and the value of the equipment at the time of the sale. So you can have fully depreciated equipment you've had for, a long time, and then it's not as valuable.
Okay. Once we sell the farm, and we sell the equipment, Dan, and I'm out of a job. So there's going to be the issue of income. What are we looking at here on the side for farmers?
Well, income replacement is a big deal. And one of the things that goes along with what Rachel was talking about is, some of the tools that people use sometimes to help spread out those expenses can also be income, and that's like an installment sale, to spread, the sale over time. Well, that installment sale can help your income once you retire and also help spread the taxes out as well. And then also once you have sold those assets, like you said, what are you going to do with that money?
Right.
And this is something that we talk with people all the time, because now you have the, of course, this is where it oftentimes makes sense to look at, income replacement tools, try to grow that money, reinvesting the proceeds into something that will, create some monthly income streams, using those proceeds to supplement, other income that you may have. Oftentimes, of course, folks maybe keep the land. If they've sold their equipment, they're keeping the land. They're renting out and they're going to get crop share rent, or they're going to get cash rent.
Sure.
So, those questions are big ones that really need to be considered with your financial advisor and with your tax professional. How do I establish those income streams, to match A, what I want to do, B, not have Uncle Sam be any bigger partner than he has to be.
Yep.
He's
going to be a partner.
He's going to be a partner, but you want him to be a minority partner as much as possible.
One of the other things that we talk about frequently is succession plan for business, but you have family and you got succession plan to the farm. What do we need to be considering there, Rachel?
Yeah, that's a good point, because many farmers, they want to keep the farm in the family.
Yeah.
So that adds a whole nother dynamic to the situation. So it's not just a business decision. There's family involved. That's your legacy. So passing the farm on to the next generation can be a pretty meaningful, time, but also there's those emotions wrapped up into it too. So there's kind of that extra dynamic there. So, you can sell to children over time with buyouts, like Dana mentioned, installment sales that can kind of help on both sides with that income stream after retirement, and then also for that next generation to be able to, afford the buyout over time. And to point out again, renting the land, you can see it both ways. Sometimes, the generation will just rent the land to their children, and that kind of makes that transition a little bit smoother, especially if you've got multiple children, and then that kind of adds a whole nother layer to it. If, let's say, you have multiple children and one wants to farm and the others don't, well, how do you kind of, divvy that up and keep it fair for everybody? Because I know that's an important piece too.
Yes. That takes a lot of conversation as well.
Very much.
So.
Yes. And we've seen it, families have a well laid out plan and everybody kind of agrees and it can go smoothly, and other times it can create, a rift in the family. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
for sure. So again, start that conversation, like Dan said, early, rather, maybe well in advance of that whole retirement age that you're looking forward to. So what about legal issues and that sort of thing, Dan? What do we think? Because again, we're going to get into some legal issues here. What do we need to think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to give any legal advice here, of course. But, how your assets are titled, is very important. Are they titled individually, an LLC, through a corporation, and then also, like Rachel just mentioned about the installment sales and things like that. Are you going to do lease to buy? Are you going to do outright sales? There has to be clear agreements for everyone and to protect everyone, both the party that's selling plus the party that's purchasing, and it really doesn't matter if it's family or not in those instances. You need to have the correct paperwork, the correct, documents and legal structures set up. And oftentimes I see families that go, they bought pieces of equipment together, dad and the son years ago, whatever, or two brothers bought stuff or whatever, Well, and now it's time to get out of the business. Well, who does really own that? Oh, I don't remember. Oh, you've been using it,
Right.
And so just to avoid those family rifts, like Rachel mentioned, you need to have things in writing and make sure you get it correct. I mean, it's worth the time, because we've all seen those times when
Yes.
things went sideways.
Absolutely. Okay, you kind of touched on it just a little bit there, and Rachel did as well. Emotional portion of it, which is huge when you're talking about the family farm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of others that tie into that, but then also the lifestyle side of things as well. Rachel, what are the considerations there you look at?
Yeah, for sure. Because, farming is more than a job.
Yes.
Right? That's your identity. You're not retiring from a 9 to 5. You're stepping away from something that's been a part of who you are, and probably since childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to consider, do you want to stay living on the land? A lot of retired farmers will just keep that homestead and maybe rent out that land. And also we see a lot where they'll maybe stick around and help with harvest sometimes, just to kind of stay in that farming lifestyle, should you choose to do that. So there's a little bit more to think about than just, like I said, retiring from that 9 to 5 job, whether you still want to be partially involved, and, still get in that combine here and there. That's one way to kind of ease out of it too, instead of just kind of like cutting out and then completely, walking away from that lifestyle. Like I said, you've probably been in since you were a kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more than just about the numbers. You got to picture what your life looks like after farming.